for over 300,000 years. Think about that for a second. They didn't just survive, they thrived all across Eurasia. I mean, we're talking about a super successful, smart, and unbelievably tough species of human. And then, poof, in what's basically a geologic blink of an eye, they were just gone. So let's get right into it. What on earth happened to the Neanderthals?
You know, this is genuinely one of the biggest mysteries in our entire human story. And we've got to get this idea of them as primitive cavemen out of our heads. It's just wrong. These guys were masters of their world. They survived multiple ice ages. That tells you just how tough and adaptable they were. So, what gives? What could have possibly changed that brought their incredibly long reign to such a sudden, dramatic end?
Okay, check out this timeline. For hundreds of thousands of years, they were basically the dominant humans in Europe. But look at how fast everything changes right at the end. Homo sapiens, yep, that's us, show up on the scene, and boom. Within just a few thousand years, the Neanderthals are gone. That little slice of time where we overlap, that's the key. That's where the whole mystery is.
So, to really get to the bottom of this, we're going to approach it like an ancient cold case. A really, really cold case. We're going to examine the scene, we're going to line up the usual suspects, and we're going to sift through all the evidence to see if we can finally piece together what happened.
All right, first up in our lineup of suspects, it's not a who, but a what. It's the planet itself. You see, the world the Neanderthals called home was anything but stable, and it seems like things got really rough right around the time they disappeared.
Now, I know what you're thinking. They survived ice ages before, right? But this was something different. We are talking about absolutely wild, super fast climate swings. I mean, just try to imagine the forest you depend on vanishing in just a couple of generations, replaced by a frozen tundra. These weren't the slow, gradual changes that we're used to. They were violent ecological shocks. And that would have meant their main food source, all those big animals they hunted, would have moved on or just died out. That creates a constant life-or-death scramble for survival.
And, as if that wasn't already bad enough, some scientists point to this massive volcanic supereruption in what is now Italy. An event of that scale could have easily triggered a volcanic winter, just throwing the climate and the food web into even more chaos all across Europe. For populations that were already struggling, that could have been a knockout blow. But the climate wasn't the only new challenge they faced. A new player entered the game. A very different, very adaptable kind of human started moving into their territory. So let's take a look at our second suspect, the newcomers, our own ancestors, Homo sapiens.
And one of the biggest clues we have comes from, well, what was on the dinner menu. When we look at archaeological sites, it's clear Neanderthals were fantastic hunters, really specializing in that medium to large game. But modern humans, they were way more flexible. Yeah, they hunted the same stuff, but they also broadened their menu to include, well, pretty much everything. From giant mammoths all the way down to little rabbits and hares.
Okay, I know this chart looks a little complicated at first, but the main point is actually super simple. The higher up a dot is, the more that animal shows up at modern human sites. So look way up there, you've got mammoths at number 19, and then rabbits and hares at 39. What this is telling us is that our ancestors weren't just competing for the same deer and bison. They were also going after the biggest and the smallest game out there. And that kind of dietary flexibility, that's a massive advantage when the main food supply starts to get shaky.
And this whole food thing becomes even more important when you factor this in. Because of their big, muscular bodies, Neanderthals had a higher revving engine, so to speak. They needed a huge amount of calories just to get through the day, maybe even double what a modern human needed. Now, in a world where the climate's going crazy and food is getting scarce, needing twice as much fuel to run, that's a really, really serious disadvantage.
Now, here's something fascinating. Their brains were just as big as ours, but it looks like they were wired up differently. A huge chunk of the Neanderthal brain was dedicated to their visual system, which makes sense, an adaptation for the dim light of Ice Age Europe, and also to controlling those powerful bodies. But our ancestors? It seems our brains dedicated a lot more of that precious neural real estate to the parts that handle social networking and relationships.
So based on that brain wiring, scientists can actually predict the likely size of their social groups. For Neanderthals, that number comes out to about 115.
But for modern humans, it's a bit higher, around 140. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a massive difference, does it? But it's actually a total game changer. A bigger group means a bigger safety net when things go wrong. It means wider networks to trade for resources, and it means more minds to come up with new ideas. In a harsh world, that small difference gives you a critical edge.
But here's the thing.
All of these pressures from the outside, the crazy climate, the new competition, they were hitting a population that was already surprisingly fragile on the inside. And this brings us to what a lot of experts now think is the real smoking gun, a hidden vulnerability.
You know, when over 200 of the world's top experts in this field were surveyed, one cause for the Neanderthals' demise came up way more than any other. It wasn't climate, it wasn't even competition, it was demography. Which, of course, raises the question, what in the world does that actually mean?
Basically, it means their entire population was structured in a really risky way. Neanderthals weren't living in big, bustling, interconnected societies. They were living in small, scattered groups, spread out really thinly over this huge area. And crucially, there wasn't a lot of genetic mixing going on between these little groups.
And that's what made them so vulnerable. See, for a big, connected population, a new disease or a tough winter is a problem, sure, but they can bounce back. For a small, isolated group, it can be a death sentence. There's no one to turn to for help. A couple of bad hunting seasons or a new sickness could literally wipe an entire group right off the map. And with so little genetic diversity, the long-term effects of inbreeding would have just made everything worse.
So when you put all the evidence together, it becomes pretty clear there was no single killer, no one thing that did them in. Instead, it looks like the Neanderthals walked right into a perfect storm. You add a changing planet, squeezing their food supply. You had new, highly adaptable competitors moving in. You had their own bodies demanding way more fuel when there was less to go around. You had potential new diseases sweeping through. And all of this was hammering away at a population that was already small, scattered, and genetically fragile. It really was a death by 1,000 cuts.
But this leads to one last and maybe most fascinating question of all. If they were competing with our ancestors, but also interbreeding with them, did they really go extinct in the way we normally picture it? Well, the answer to that is actually written inside of you and me. It's in our DNA. Today, pretty much every person whose ancestry is from outside of Africa is carrying between 1% and 2% Neanderthal DNA.
So no, they didn't just vanish into thin air. As a separate, distinct group, yeah, their journey ended. But as people, they met our ancestors, they mingled and they merged. A part of them was absorbed into the massive river of the human gene pool, and that part of them is still flowing inside billions of us today. Their story, in a very real way, became our story.